The issue is whether the act of Matan has to constitute a battery against Aminah when he mistakenly slapped her. Battery may be defined as the intentional touching or direct application of force to the body of another person without that person's consent in a harmful or offensive manner. There are 4 elements to establish the tort of battery that must be fulfilled. The first element is the mental state of the defendant, where he must have applied the force with intention. Although the general rule is that the intention relates to the direct act of the defendant, the doctrine of transferred intent is also applicable and widens the scope and meaning of intention, thereby extending the possible liability of the defendant. In the case of Scott against Shahrul, the defendant threw a lighted spade, which is a smoke, into an open market area with lots of people and stalls. To protect themselves and avoid any damage, A picked it up and threw it upon B, who then picked it up and threw it away. When it landed near the plaintiff, whereupon it burst into flames and caused injury to his face, he later lost the use of one of his eyes. The court held that the original thrower, the defendant, was liable for the tort of trespass to person, although his initial gesture did not directly affect the plaintiff. According to the court, A and B reacted for their safety, and so they did not have the required intention to commit the act. The second element to establish battery is the defendant's act was under his control, which means that the defendant's act must be done voluntarily and is not forced by any party. Referring to the case of Gibbons against Pepper, the defendant was riding a horse. Suddenly, someone hit the horse from behind, causing the horse to bolt, then collided to the plaintiff. In this case, the court found that the defendant not liable as the incident of the horse bolting and colliding with the plaintiff was outside his control. The third element is there must be contact or any application of force on the plaintiff's body or clothing that can cause actual harm, meaning that either physical, mental, or emotional. Referring to the case of Cole against Turner, the claimants were a husband and wife who had allegedly suffered battery by the defendant. The court held that the least touching of another in anger is considered as battery, and if 2 or more persons meet in a narrow passage and without any violence or form of harm, if they touch the other gently, it will be non-battery. One cannot touch another person without his consent, or lawful justification is another element to establish battery. In the case of Nash against Shin, the plaintiff went to a hairdressing salon and requested for a perm. Instead of a perm, the defendant used a third wrist, which is hair dye, with first obtaining the plaintiff's consent. The plaintiff unfortunately developed some skin complications which caused rashes on the head due to an adverse reaction to the tone rinse. The court held that the consent given by the plaintiff did not include the tone rinse and its consequences. Battery was established. Based on the current case, Matan intends to slap Omong's face, but since Omong avoided it, he had caused offensive manner to Aminah by slapping her face, even though he did not intend to hit Aminah, but the doctrine of transferred intent should be applicable, although his initial gesture did not directly can affect Aminah. So the first element has been fulfilled. For the second element, Matan was angered by Omong's remarks and he tried to slap Omong, but Omong burst and avoided Matan's hands. It shows that Matan voluntarily wants to slap Omong and was not forced by anyone. This can prove that he has the intention to act voluntarily. So the second element also fulfilled. Other than that, the act of Matan has been an account of violence on Aminah when the act of slapping actual harm by physically on Aminah. It shows that the third element has been fulfilled. It is undeniable that Aminah does not consent to Omong's act because no one can give consent for others to slap their face. Therefore, the fourth element of battery was fulfilled. It can be concluded that the act of Matan has been constituted a battery against Aminah when he mistakenly slapped her, since all the elements of battery were fulfilled. Aminah, as an aggrieved person, may file charge towards Matan.
The next issue in this case is whether members of Jalan-Jalan Club and Omong had done trespass by entering tin quarry which is owned by Matan. Trespass to land can be defined as every entry without lawful justification by one person on land which is in the possession of another person, provides a cause of action for trespass by the latter against the former, and being actionable per se. Trespass to land is not dependent on proof of damage of the plaintiff. For the first element, in providing the mental state of the defendant, there must be the intention to trespass, or even there is no intention to trespass by the defendant, and there must be voluntary act in entering the land that is in the possession of another by the defendant. Based on the situation given, the act of Jalan-Jalan Club members assigned Tualang Adventures to help them planning their trip and guide them shows that they had intention to trespass anyone's land. Omong, who is the guider assigned by the Tualang Adventures, voluntarily bring the Jalan-Jalan Club to the intended location. When they follow Omong as the guider, it shows that they voluntarily followed him wherever Omong brings them, even until they was through the abandoned tin quarry which is owned by Matan. In the case of Bunsu bin Junaidi versus Bodko Engineering and Construction Sdn Bhd, the plaintiff in this case was registered as the proprietor of all that parcel of land at Lot 1643, Block 11, Seduan Land District. The defendant in this case had entered into agreement with the owner of the land which is next to the plaintiff land to make a construction development. Plaintiff found out that the defendant had trespassed his land while they are working on the construction development in the plaintiff's neighbor land. Plaintiff had complained to the defendant, but then they still keep doing the construction. This shows that the defendant intentionally and voluntarily do the construction until it affected the plaintiff's land. The defendant was held liable by illegally trespass of the plaintiff's land. The second element is Matan need to prove that the interference to the plaintiff land, which is his land, is a foreseeable consequence of a defendant's act. Under this element, there are few types of interference. However, the types of interference that suit this situation is entering land which is in the plaintiff possession. Based on this situation, since the members of Jalan-Jalan Club had assigned Tualang Adventure to bring them to venture into the virgin jungles of Sabah, they should know that they got possibility to enter to anyone else's land. So, they had entering the land which is belong to the others, in this case is Matan. In the case of Trevor Kenneth Baringking vs Pantai Dalit Beach Resort, Sdn Bhd, the plaintiff in this case was the administrator of the estate of his father, who was registered as the owner of the native land, while the defendant was the registered owner of a piece of land. The defendant had constructed a concrete road without the consent of the plaintiff, which had encroached onto the plaintiff land. The court held that the defendant's construction of the said road on the portion of the plaintiff lands amount to trespass. Matan does not need to prove damages on his land since trespass is actionable per se. Proving damages is not a requirement in establishing the liability. Since Matan has established all the elements, which is the two elements, he can sue Omong and Jalan-Jalan Club members for trespassing his land.
Whether Manik has committed a trespass to goods when he quietly took a few tools as souvenirs at the tin quarry. Trespass to goods may be defined as wrongful and direct interference with goods in the possession of others. There are two elements that needs to be established, namely the mental state of the defendant and the interference by the defendant. The mental state of the defendant, like in all intentional torts, it must be proven that the defendant intended to deal with the goods of the plaintiff. In Wilson and Lombard 1963, the defendant who labored in mistake took the plaintiff's car from the workshop, believing it was his car. The court held that since the defendant had the intention to take trespass to goods was established. Applying to the recent case, Manik, a new member of Jalan Jalan Club, secretly took some items as souvenirs, following earlier reminders from Omong not to take them. This clearly can be seen that Manik was crystal clear have the intention to take the goods from the abandoned quarry, despite he was warned earlier by Omong. Okay, for the second element, there must be interference by the defendant. Interference shall be if the defendant's direct act causes immediate contact with the property or goods of the plaintiff. This interference must, in other words, be physical in nature. Interference must also be voluntary, since involuntary intent may be negative. In Sarawak Energy, Berhad and another, and Peter Kalang and others, the plaintiff's core samples were illegally interfered with removal by the protesters from the storage boxes where they were securely packed and labelled. Following the aforementioned protest held at the main camp on 24/10/2013, the said core samples were further damaged by being hurled and smashed to the grounds after such removal. Following such destruction, the plaintiffs were unable to use the said core samples and suffered loss and damage. Referring back to Manik's case, while he is on his way with Jalan Jalan Club, they were passing through an abandoned tin quarry. Manik saw there were many equipment that were left behind, and some of it have values. Then he took some of the goods to himself. It can be proven that Manik has the immediate contact direct with the goods, and his act from taking the goods from the abandoned tin quarry was unlawful and unjustified. In addition, for plaintiff who sues in trespass to goods, there is no need to prove damage, as it is not necessary in establishing a tort which is actionable per se. It can be concluded that after establishing the elements of trespass to goods which are mental of state of the defendant and interference of goods, Manik is responsible and held to be liable for his action. Omong, as the owner of the mine, can take action or sue Manik for trespass to goods.
So here I am presenting to you under an issue of inevitable accident. Based on the question given, the issue arises is whether Matan can invoke inevitable accident as a possible defense to deny his liability towards Aminah. What is inevitable accident? Inevitable accident can be defined as the party charged could not prevent the accident to be occurred by exercising the ordinary care. Or in other words, it's enough to say that even though the utmost caution has been taken by the defendant, the accident will still be occurred. Like usual, in invoking inevitable accident as a defense,
our situation, Matan, Omong and Aminah. In our situation, Matan has mistakenly slapped Aminah as Omong has swerved the slap and avoided Matan's hand. In this case, it is crystal clear to say that Matan cannot argue on the first element. It is obvious that the slap is produced by Matan, the defendant. Moving on to the second element, he has to prove that he already take a reasonable precaution before the damages happen to Aminah. However, we argue that the damage happened to Aminah is beyond the reach of foreseeable events. It can be concluded that Matan may be succeeded in raising inevitable accident as a defense, as the element under the defense is already established.